Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Last time I talked about my entire story as an attractions cast member, as well as, some of my crazy guest interactions from working my 3 attractions. They were Autopia, Monorail, and Star Tours. If you are interested in watching those, a card probably popped up to see the complete playlist of all those videos. Oh, these are also available in podcast form for those who want to listen to this on the go via the YouTube Music app. Anyway, this video will be covering the not safe for work guest interactions I experienced at my 3 attractions, as well as scattered throughout the land of tomorrow. I worked at Disneyland from May of 2019 to December of 2023, so obviously I was bound to run into guests that did some things that I can't talk about with the children around. Speaking of which, this video is not recommended for younger audience due to the nature of some of these stories I will be telling. I also don't recommend listening to this video if you're in a sensitive setting like work or school, unless you got headphones. I will be discussing some sensitive topics that are sexual, graphic, or sort of gross in nature. So please do not listen to this if you are sensitive to that type of material or not old enough to consume that type of media. This will be my only verbal warning, so please go watch the safer work ones if you fit into those categories. Now with that out of the way, this video is going to have chapters and timestamps available on the video itself or in the description for those who want to skip around. For this video specifically, each chapter will be separated by the attractions I worked when these interactions occurred. So there won't be an exact chapter with whatever stories we're diving into. Basically, all these stories happen at their respective attractions and they're not going to have their own individual category. Other than that, as always, these videos are more meant for listening purpose, but somewhat related, B-roll footage will be playing on the screen, mostly relating to the attraction it was at. So I do apologize for having a clickbaity thumbnail. Also, while not really needed for this video specifically, I do have a mini series where I go over the surface level operations of my 3 attractions if for some reason you have no idea what the setting was for these attractions. Alright, enough of that info dumping, and let's get on to the NSFW interactions I had with guests. Star Tours. Star Tours was my 3rd and final attraction that I learned after coming back from the pandemic. I learned it a month later, like in July of 2021, and worked it off and on until my departure with the company in December of 2023. I honestly don't have much to tell with this attraction that has already been stated in my previous guest interactions video on that attraction. That being said, I do have a sliver of stories that are a little insane to be deemed not safe for work. Now, some could argue that one story where the guy was punching people was NSFW, or the lady who vomited up gallons of puke all over the exit area and the 2 cabins or whatever. So let's go ahead and start off this video with one of my tamer stories, but still sort of gross. This isn't really a guest interaction, but more of a nasty thing that I wanted to talk about that I left out in the Star Tours video. Yes, unfortunately it involves puke again. As you can guess, Star Tours does cause a lot of motion sickness with guests that are, prone to it, and unfortunately, they cannot hold down their lunch after riding it. Well, if you're familiar with this attraction at any of the Disney parks that have it, you will know that cast members collect glasses at the exit of the attraction, usually in the bins that say, glasses go here. The downside is they sort of look like trash cans, and sometimes people do throw their trash in there. I mean, not that bad because most of the time it's just crumpled up pieces of paper or a wipe, so it's an easier cleanup. Yeah, easier cleanup. Just to come out with it, yeah, a guest vomited in one of these glasses bins. Now, the only reason this becomes a little gross is because of something on the internal side. Apparently, the custodial department didn't want to clean it up because the bag is technically under the costuming department's jurisdiction for them to clean up. I kid you not, this was a back and forth thing for almost a month. Mind you, there was still vomit in this bag for almost a month. Our solution as attractions was just to, cover up that bin with the black trash bag as a "don't throw stuff in here" warning thing. Freaking ghetto ass setup if I tell you what. Obviously, guests did throw their glasses in there and other trash items because It's a black trash bag. What are they gonna do? Now, this isn't really a guest issue, but I wanted to bring it up because, you know, it's nasty and just don't vomit in those bags, please. Oh yeah, remember how I told you that some guests would treat those glasses bins as, you know, a trash can? Well, this one's a bit nastier, and luckily was cleaned up a bit quicker. Now, I'll give you a moment to guess what the guest threw away into these glasses bins. Well, as we call it in the industry, it's called a Code H. This specific one was under the medical side of Code H. So no, it wasn't poop. Alright, time's up. If you guessed a used tampon, you were correct. Congrats, you get to hear this nasty thing in detail. I want to emphasize that this was a freshly used tampon, by the way. It wasn't wrapped up in toilet paper or anything. Some nasty lady literally took it out of her hoo-ha and threw the bloody tampon into the glasses bin. Freaking nasty, bro. I'm obviously not a lady and I don't have those parts downstairs, but I know for a fact y'all at least wrap it up and dispose of it properly, or at least I hope. Not just yeet your bloody stick on some 3D glasses, because that is not the 3D effect that I want to see. The upside to this story is that we at least had an extra bag by then, and this one was quickly cleaned up and didn't sit there for a month. Yeah, nasty, am I right? I'm going to state this as a former cast member from Star Tours, but please do not throw away anything in those glasses bins. They're literally just meant for the cast members to scoop up, put it in their big glasses sack, and take those glasses backstage to be thrown in the glasses cleaning machine. I just hope those glasses were properly cleaned or thrown away, because yuck. Alright, this next story isn't as gross as the last one, but will be the last one from this attraction. To paint a mental picture, I was in the position that watches all the cabins during their flight. Yeah, to spoil the magic a bit, if it's dark, there are definitely cameras. They can see anything you're doing in the dark because, you know, they're infrared cameras. Anyway, this flight was sort of empty. A few people scattered in the first 2 rows and a couple in the back row. You can probably guess where this is going. My coworker pretty much gets the cabin ready for its launch and for some reason holds off on starting the ride. Nothing popped up on my monitor that would tell me if there was something wrong, so I just assumed they got sidetracked with actually launching their cabin, as it does happen from time to time. This is the part of the ride where you can hear the exit ramps go up, but the entrance ramps haven't gone up yet. You sort of know when the entrance ramps go up because that's when C-3PO comes on screen and is like, "Hey, we can't take off yet, the captain's not on board, bae," or whatever the hell he says. So these guests are literally just sitting in a dark room for a good minute. Well, a minute was all this guy needed as he whipped out his ding dong and his partner started to, you know, touch his ding ding dong as the song goes. At this point, my coworker finally launches the cabin and I'm just in awe. No way this dude is going to eject his little astronauts in this cabin. So I called one of my coworkers from the turnstile to come bump me out of my safety position. They came in and saw that yes, this dude was trying to get a good blast off. They bumped me out and I initiated a flight stop on their cabin. It's sort of like an emergency stop, but we can recover from it without needing maintenance to fix it. I then waited for their flight to come to a rest and I walked in the back row as soon as the doors opened. I went in and looked at the dude in question, and don't worry, he had his Johnson away at this time. I was just feeling nice this day because I told them that they could still ride but they had to sit in different rows, or they had to leave and not return this attraction for the rest of the day. They obviously took the second option because they knew I stopped the ride because of them. I was surprised they didn't try to just book it as soon as the doors opened, but you know, they took the L and hopefully learned a life lesson, as embarrassment is a good teacher. After they left, one of the dads in the front row looked at me and asked, "Handy in the back?" I obviously couldn't say yeah, but I kind of sort of did the thing with my face that was just like, yeah. Let this be a warning to those who watch this video. If it's dark, they can see you. Also, out of all the attractions, really? Alright, anyway, this is just the first of many stories that have guests, you know, trying to get off, as I have more to tell, but not from this attraction, because, to be honest, this attraction was pretty straightforward and nothing really happened. So let's go ahead and move on to Autopia, and leave the stars behind us or something. I don't freaking know. Autopia. Now, just for some backstory for those unaware, I hired into Autopia. This was my first attraction I learned back in May of 2019, and I knew it obviously until the day I left in December of 2023. This attraction had some crazy guests due to the nature of it, and I obviously told the ones that are safe for work already. You can go listen to that if you like, if you aren't already sick of hearing my terrible voice. Now, knowing this attraction for almost 5 years led to a lot of interactions with guests. Some positive, some negative, and a few, I don't really know how to describe it. Let's just go ahead and start off with the track position at Autopia. This position basically makes sure everyone's buckled up and tells them what they need to know. Now, not trying to be pervy or anything, but we were literally staring at the guest crotches all day because, hey, that's just where the seatbelt is sometimes. Not that I want to see a dude's junk, but sometimes guests don't believe in wearing a belt, nor do they believe in, wearing underwear. This dude literally stood up after riding, and his pants fell down. So I was in view of seeing some random stranger's tool. I didn't want to be part of the D Club, but now I am with this random guy. Speaking of no underwear, this one woman sat down and her dress came up as she sat down. I just happened to be looking, and another thing that I didn't want to see. To make matters worse, she didn't actually notice that she was exposed, and I sort of hinted to this lady hey. She finally then looked at me and pretty much acted ditzy. Oh, I didn't know it was up. Silly me. I don't want to see your hairy cavern, bro. She finally put down her dress after what felt like 10 minutes, but in reality this was 10 seconds at most. She then buckled up and literally blew me a kiss as she left. Now when she finally came back around, I had the pleasure of not being there anymore, but I told my coworker to remove her car for custodial reasons when that lady came back, as I was bumped into a different position by then. To this day, I still don't know if that was an accident or she thought it was okay to flash an employee at a children's theme park, but obviously some guests have no standards, and I could just point to the example of what happened at Small World. All I can tell you is that this guy showed his small to the world. Alright, enough of that wardrobe malfunction talk. Still over on the track positions, but if you know Autopia, you would know that these cars are extremely low to the ground. They are a little hard to get in and out of, especially if you're over 5 feet tall, or over 150 centimeters for my metric enthusiasts out there. Sometimes guests would fall getting in or out. Obviously this isn't a really NSFW thing, but where it gets to that point is this one incident with this one lady. This is over on the blue track at the number 4 spot, and if you know what I'm talking about, you would know that this spot has one of the people mover pillars right smack in the front of it. Long story short, this lady tripped while getting out and cracked her skull open as she bonked the pillar that hard. She was literally unconscious for a hot second. I had to think quickly, and I ran over to one of my coworkers with the radio to call the lead and let them know what happened. As soon as I got back, this lady somehow regained consciousness and was getting up by the time I got back, literally started walking up the stairs. I realized that it was a bit worse than I expected, as she also dislocated her shoulder upon landing on the floor, and there was also a blood spot on the pillar itself. She hit the pillar really hard, by the way, louder than those rattling lawnmower engines. I told her to please stay where she was at, but there was a language barrier. She spoke Japanese, and I had to pull out my extremely broken Japanese that I did know. I just said Kazutsuku, which is literally just the word hurt, and she replied with hi, which is yes. See, I probably butchered it, but it's not that good. My lead finally comes running out to come help with the situation, and luckily the nurse came out quickly, and they handled the situation fairly quickly. It also helped that one of my managers that showed up also knew way more Japanese than my dub watching ass. I felt bad for this poor lady as she got messed up by the car and then by the immovable pillar. Just a note, please be careful when getting out of those cars. The only upside to this situation is that other guests weren't nosy and trying to record the situation like this next one. There was a medical situation that happened over on the green track where a guest started to have a seizure when getting out of their car. Honestly, I don't know what caused him to have it, but all I remember is that this older man was having a seizure, and we had to clear out this part of the attraction to give this guy some breathing room. Well, this situation started to become more difficult as we had multiple guests start recording this poor dude having a medical moment. Now, it was like 2 or 3 guests, but it was still more than that should have been doing that. This is where I had to step in and tell these guests to not record this. I had this one lady tell me that she knew her rights, and I told her that I don't consent to you recording this, as California law protects you from this sort of thing. While obviously I don't know the guy, I personally wouldn't want some jackass recording me in this sort of situation to, put it online for possibly millions to see. So now, instead of trying to clear off the platform, I'm telling these two guests to put their phone away and leave. Luckily, one of them understood after I brought up the California law thing, except for this genius lady. She was trying to get past my coworker to film this dude, and that's where one of the family members stepped in and told this lady to F off. Surprisingly, that was enough to make her put away her phone, but what the hell, man? How delusional do you have to be to record someone at their low moment, especially when it's a medical thing? So you can just get some views online? Seriously, shaking my head, dude. She finally left, and I finally got the rest of the crowd cleared off the platform, because they were blocking it. Luckily, this guy seemed to be okay after one of the nurses checked him out when they arrived. That lady also had the gall to complain to one of my managers about how rude I was to her, and she sort of got the "are you serious" treatment, so kudos to my management team for that one. This next interaction shut down one of our tracks due to the nature of the subject. I didn't mention it in my previous video just because it wasn't really a comfortable topic to bring up. Sometimes we have guests on the autistic spectrum that do come and visit Autopia. They usually ride multiple times in a row, and there really isn't an issue with that. This certain interaction happened because a man with autism had a freak out after his 4th or 5th time. Now, I understand sometimes it happens, especially because the ride does get sort of loud, but this only happened because another guest yelled at this poor guy to get out, even though we were letting everybody know that, hey, this guy's going to keep going around because that's what he wants to do. The reason this guest yelled at this guy was because he was in a green car, and his son wanted a green car, even though there were plenty others in rotation on both tracks. To make matters worse, the man with autism starts screeching because he's terrified of this dude who's screaming at him over a baby car ride. And now we have to give this guy some space. Well, we tell the angry guest to just go get in the car on the other track that's green, and we were trying to locate this guy's parents or caretakers. Yeah, I guess they left, just left him at the attraction as they went over to another land or something. We ended up having to close the track this man was on, just so we can get it quieter for him and have no more vehicle motion on this track just in case he were to hop out on the wrong side. We were only thinking of his safety. Well, after this track came to a full stop, we now have the task of keeping an eye on him while security went to go locate his parents or guardians. After about 2 hours, the man's dad showed up and was able to get him out of the car. The only nice part was that one of my coworkers stayed with him the entire time and tried to calm them down as best as she could, while the rest of us had to keep the operations going without drawing a scene to this poor guy. While not entirely related to Autopia, sometimes guests will leave their family members at the park, and I have a story at the Monorail that I will talk about in the next chapter. The sad truth is that people will ditch their family members, sometimes even their kids. While it's not commonly talked about, it's something that I did want to mention. It's an unfortunate, sad truth. Anyway, let's move on to another story, shall we? Hey, remember how I told you about the guy getting his rod whacked at Star Tours? Well, this also happened at Auto a few times. Obviously, this was more common at night, especially with the special event nights like Sweethearts Night. But I or my other coworkers would catch someone with their willy out getting yanked off while driving around. It was always in the campground area for some reason, or when they came to the off-road section. Like, did you not expect us to be there? That's one of our positions. These areas just had some of the worst lighting at night when I worked there, as the light bulbs were always dimmer for some reason in these areas. Shaking my head, dude. Speaking of out on the attraction, if you're familiar with this setup, there is a lot of trees and bushes and other shrubbery around the tracks. Obviously, some animals do live in these areas, and this is where the next story comes into play. If you watched my Monorail video, you heard about the code Donald I got while driving the train. Well, we actually had an incident where a guest accidentally ran over some baby ducks, and the kid driving had a severe panic attack where we had to shut down the attraction temporarily, not only to just clean up the squished duck, but also to calm down this poor kid. Just be careful of wildlife when driving these cars around if you do visit. Unless it's a cockroach, then you can run those things over. let's go ahead and wrap up the Autopia chapter with a final story. Fittingly, this takes place at the exit of the attraction with the license booths. If you listen to my full story about being a cast member for 5 years, you would know one of these stories, as there are some teenagers in the license booth getting past second base, and I ended up spraining my wrist being an idiot to get security out there. Well, this one is a different instance, but it was at park closing time. Our last guests of the night finally left, and of course they stopped to get a license. Now normally they would get their license and, be gone within 5 minutes tops. Nah, not these guests. We waited a good 10 minutes for these clowns to come out of the booths, and that's where a few of my coworkers stepped in to see what was going on. Well, surprise, surprise, they were getting frisky in the booth. The only reason we found out was because the guy left first and he was all proud of himself. Then a few minutes later, the lady with him left the booth as if no one was watching. I mean, we were all watching, we were waiting for them to leave so we could drop our safety positions. Now, we didn't report them because it was the end of the night, but it's just like, what's with you people and getting down in the booths? There's also this trashy photo that does get shared around online every once in a while of this lady flashing her hooters on one of the Autopia license card. Obviously, I wasn't there for that, but just take a normal picture and get out of there. No ding-dong shots, no knocker shots, and no playing hide the pickle in the license booth, please. It's a family park. Stop it. You're there to have fun with your families, not to make families. Let's move on to the next chapter. The Monorail. The moment has finally arrived, and we are finally at the attraction I was at most during my time at Disney. I learned Monorail in February of 2020, and literally worked it up until my very last day in December of 2023. I was also a lead/supervisor at this attraction, so of course I saw more than my other 2 attractions, especially how some cabins might be more private than others when there were no guests around with you. Well, how much more unhinged can these stories get, because you probably thought they were already crazy and my safe for work one, which by the way you can check out here if you want. Well, sit down and buckle up because we're gonna go full speed with this monorail, boys and girls. To hit the ground running, this one happened prior to the pandemic, as it's when we were still loading the nose and tail cone. The sun was finally setting and the day was turning into night. I loaded a couple into the tail cone at the downtown Disney station, and as I saw the train leaving, they were starting to get to first base already. I radioed the driver to keep an eye on their tail cone, because the guests were probably going to get, down. Normally, guests would just make out, and while sometimes we would just creepily watch to the cameras, as long as they weren't getting worse than PG-13, it was fine. Well, these guests made the rating go from PG to NC-17 as pants started to come off apparently. So my coworkers and I are just listening on the radio that this couple is just getting to home base, all while security is on their way to the Tomorrowland station. From what my coworkers on that site told me, the train arrived and security just wasn't quite there yet. My coworker at the position that opens all the doors was told not to let the guests out of the tail cone, as you can't really open it from the inside. Well, I think the guy caught on that they were trapped in there, as this dude literally popped open the roof escape hatch and slid down the tail cone and ran down the exit stairs with pants in hand, all while leaving his lady friend in the tail cone. Unfortunately for this guy, he bumped into security as he rounded the corner of Nemo's queue, and now was not only in trouble for doing the hanky-panky, but also in trouble for delaying the operations of the monorail. Yeah, those hatches are for emergencies only, and when they're opened, they have to take it back to the monorail shop for the maintenance team to reattach properly, or else the computer gets all freaked out. So that train was out of commission, and not for the mess they made back there either. Man, that's a doozy. Speaking of guests doing midnight laundry in the monorail, sometimes they get funky in the normal cabins. To set the environment again, this is the middle of the day, and I'm taking the train over to the downtown Disney station. So to start off, this is about a 2-minute ride to that station. Upon leaving the station, and on the straightaway next to Harbor Boulevard, I started checking my cameras to make sure everyone was seated. Well, I get to my 4th cabin, and I notice this lady was sitting on some dude, and they both had their pants down. There is no way they're going to have that wrapped up within the mere minute we're about to come into the station. I end up going over the intercom for their cabin and just say, "Hey, just a friendly reminder that everyone needs to be seated on a bench and not on another person." That's when I can see this dude literally throw this poor lady off him, and they quickly put their pants back on, We were now rounding the Lego store and slowly coming into the station. I was going to have a nice chat with them, but when my coworker opened up the doors, they bolted quicker than rabbits multiply. I honestly don't blame them, but at the same time, you're here to ride the monorail and not get your monorail ridden? Shaking my head, dude. This goes back to my point from Star Tours. If you're in a concealed space that can get dark, there is always a camera. The cast members can see you, and I can tell you that they don't want to see that sometimes. Now, I have one more story about guests that think they're invisible, but this one was just insane. I was the lead for this shift, and I was riding back in the train with one of my coworkers while they were driving. I was actually just doing one of my audits that leads have to do every day for their shift, and my coworker was just checking their cameras, as we're supposed to check them every once in a while during the flight. This is where we saw something that we didn't want to see. Now, you might guess it was just another couple doing some midnight dribbles on the basketball court, but no, surprisingly not this time. There was this dude who was butt-ass naked in the cabin. I kid you not, we saw this dude's entire ass in the camera. Not that he was mooning us, but he was just naked. To make matters worse, there were other people in the cabin too. It's not like it was a full cabin, but it was a small handful of people that didn't know this guy, by the way. They weren't in his party. Now, you may be wondering, was this guy just an exhibitionist, or was he just taking some LSD to go over to Small World? No, we caught this guy apparently in the middle of changing clothes. Yeah, this guy decided that, yes, the monorail is the best place to freeball it and change my clothes. First of all, why? Second of all, why? What the hell is wrong with people? Not to defend this guy, but if he was changing his shirt, I would somewhat understand, but nah, he got fully nude and then put a different pair of clothes on. I then radioed my coworker at the Tomorrowland station to not open up the cabin that he was in, and I went to go talk to this guy once we got to the station. Granted, this is my first week as a lead, so I wasn't ready to deal with this sort of situation. Anyway, I asked him why he was stripping on my attraction, and he said he just spilled some juice on his shirt and needed to change. That's when I asked him why he had to get naked to do it, and he just thought he might as well change his entire outfit while he was at it. Like, okay, I get your logic, but at the same time, couldn't you have just waited to get somewhere more private to do that? I'm just glad there were no children in the train with him, and the party that was in the cabin with him apparently didn't even know he was changing as they were facing the opposite direction of him. Being a newer lead, I was just flabbergasted, and I just told this guy to leave and not come back to our attraction. It didn't help that same day, a different guy literally dropped a Lincoln log a few hours after this naked guy. I already told that story in my monorail video though, and looking back at it, I should have been a bit more firmer and reported these weirdos, but the naked guy luckily didn't have any other guests that saw him do it, and that poop bandit had no one else in his cabin that spoke a lick of English as they were all in his party. Honestly, shaking my head seriously this time. Now, this next part of the video is where we go from funny haha naked guy to, oh, this is serious. This next interaction is going to be a bit more on the graphic side and nature, and something even might be a little too much for this current audience to handle. If you do not want to hear it, please skip to 30:20 in the video. I will be mentioning when this part is over, once I get to it as well as for those who are staying with me. The terrible part about this job is sometimes we encounter some guests who cross the line with people in their party, especially young children. I want to emphasize that this is an extremely rare scenario that only happened once during my entire time at the resort. We had an incident where a father or a guardian was yelling at their poor kid. It got to the point where this kid had pissed them off where it was uncomfortable for everyone in range. To make it much worse, they ended up telling the kid to go somewhere with them and grab them by their hair and drag them along the hot concrete to get where they were going. I do not care how much your child pisses you off, you never, ever do that to your kid. And if you see someone doing that to a child in public, who knows what they do to them in private. My coworker saw this go down and ended up calling the police, as this was beyond something security could even deal with. While personally I did not see this go down, I was in earshot and I could hear this guy violently screaming at this poor kid. From what I remember, Another guest ended up stepping in and de-escalating the situation as best as they could, as it's not exactly a comfortable scenario for anyone to deal with. I just remember that my coworker and a few other guests had to write a police report, and they had to talk to CPS as well. I'm going to state this now: see something, say something. You have the chance to save a child's life by doing the bare minimum of getting the right people to the right place. Also stating this, if you ever hurt a child like this, you are literally the scum of the earth. I understand that children can be frustrating sometimes, but there is absolutely no reason to violently attack children. Alright, that's enough for the heavy subject. If you're hearing this, you made it past that part, and there will be no more stories that get to that close level of seriousness. Anyway, let's go ahead and scoot back to another topic that I brought up earlier. You remember how I told you that sometimes guests will leave their family members in the park? Well, we had this one instance where a family left their grandparent in a wheelchair up at the Tomorrowland station. We thought they were just waiting for their family to come back or were just watching the trains go by, but after about 30 minutes, it seemed a little strange. To give you an idea, a round trip is about 15 minutes, tops. Apparently, the family had left the park for the day and were already on the road by the time we figured out that they ditched their senior member of the party. This poor man was up at our station for 3 hours until the family finally came back. The old man did have their number to call them, and it was only until security got involved when they finally came back to get him. They were trying to pull the, "Oh, we just forgot" card. Like, how do you just forget grandpa in the wheelchair? You've been pushing him around all day and you just now forgot? The only reason they came back is because they were threatened for senior abuse. Honestly, it sucks that people try to ditch their family members at the park. That must be a real gut punch to take someone to the happiest place on earth, only to get left there. This next one was myself as the lead, responding to a medical run at a different attraction. Well, it directly wasn't at the Monorail, it was at an attraction in the land. Apparently some dude thought it'd be quicker to hop over the chain instead of walking over around the lightning lane entrance for Star Tours. Well, he effed around and found out as the chain caught his foot, and he quickly met the pavement, cracking his skull. I left my attraction to help form a wall around this guy, as the general public doesn't need to see some poor dude bleeding on the floor. The reason I bring this up is because I did the same thing by jumping over the chain, and I sprained my wrist in the process. Trust me, it's way easier on you, and possibly your wallet, to just spend the extra few seconds walking around. Granted, I was trying to tell on some hooligan teenagers doing the inappropriate dance in the Autopia license booth, but I messed up my wrist a few weeks before my daughter was born, so, big oops on my part. Now heading back to the attraction, this one actually happened in the queue of the Tomorrowland station. It was about an hour or so before park closing, and a couple got into a tussle in the line. I honestly don't know what they were fighting about, and the only reason we found out is because the Autopia lead called our station to let us know that this couple was throwing fists at each other. Since we had 2 extra people at the station, myself and another coworker went down to de-escalate the situation as best as we could. We head down, and they're throwing every name in the book at each other, and still swinging punches at each other. All I know is that she didn't want to be anywhere near this guy, and he didn't want to deal with this crazy B word anymore. To make things worse, we are starting to get a small handful of guests coming into the queue, and they're greeted with an unwanted WWE SmackDown in the middle of the queue. I sort of had to hold the line from keeping more guests from coming in, as I didn't know if these idiots were going to start swinging at random people. That's when backup finally arrived, and I kid you not, a small army of security cast members showed up and handled the situation from there. By that time though, the lady somehow managed to squeeze out of the line, and the guy was just telling the security manager that women be crazy. Like, bro, you obviously did something to upset your girlfriend, but that's not my business. It was just crazy how these people were willing to go full on violent punch mode at each other at a family theme park, but whatever, man. These final stories of this section are actually ones I forgot to tell in my previous video. I also feel like it's just a common sense thing. While it doesn't really classify as NSFW, I just wanted to throw it out here anyway. Well, we got a radio call of guest entrapment in an elevator. Now, where was this elevator? It was at the Tomorrowland station, of course. I guess some guests got stuck in the elevator, and it does happen from time to time. But the reason the elevator broke is because 14 people stuffed themselves into it. They couldn't handle the weight limit, and these geniuses were stuck in the elevator for a good hour while the elevator mechanic came to fix it. To add on, after this little incident, The elevator was down for a good month to properly get fixed, as they really only got them out of the elevator. What made it more difficult is the fact they also had an electric scooter shoved in there. If you're aware, that elevator isn't the biggest and also weirdly smells like crayons. I don't know why, but the crayon smell has always been there. Yeah, probably scary for them, but that's a life lesson following the basic common sense rules. Now to finally top off this video with a super tame story compared to the rest, but another one I forgot to tell in my last video. Basically, I was the closing lead and we were starting to get ready to shut down for the fireworks show. Well, a fire alarm went off at the Nemo attraction, and since they're right below us, we had to start getting everybody out of the station and treat it like a real deal. Haha, this real deal unfortunately was just some hooligans smoking a joint in the observation room and trying to hotbox it. I don't know how stupid you can be to hotbox the room meant for those who literally can't go down the stairs on the submarine ride. I seriously don't understand why people have to smoke their weed at Disneyland, and I hate the smell of it. I don't care if you do it, but don't do it at a children's theme park. I know it's a lame story to end this video off, but the only reason they got caught is because the fire alarm went off, and these ding-dongs were still in that room smoking it up when a Nemo cast member finally came in to get them all out. It's just annoying because not only does Nemo have to do a full evacuation, which is really tedious by the way, but I also had to hold my operations right before the fireworks show, which is a peak time where people are using our attraction for transport. I can tell you that most fire alarms at the parks are usually some dick sponge smoking their vapes and such. Yeah, that's pretty much it for my NSFW stories, as most were already stated in my actual Monorail video and the previous videos before that. So go check them out if you're bored, if you haven't already. That's going to wrap it up for this video. I want to make it clear that these occurrences were rare and obviously weren't happening all the time. If you take anything away from hearing these wild guests that I encountered, is that I hope you just keep it in your pants next time. Disneyland is a place for families and, not making them. Anyway, we're starting to get towards the end of my guest interaction stories arc. The next episode will be the last in this arc, and I will be ending it on a positive note. I will be talking about all the positive guest interactions I had at my 3 attractions, and there were a lot actually. After that, I will be diving into what it was like working my attractions, which will be more or less focused on what the job was like, as well as what it was like working with my coworkers. Something to look forward to if you have been enjoying this series. As a friendly reminder that these will be coming out roughly every month or so, not to oversaturate my channel with Disney content. I have been appreciating all the viewers listening to these dumb little podcasts, and I do appreciate all the engagement on them as well. I guess we shall see how this one does, especially since it's a bit risque and whatnot. Thanks for watching and or listening to this video. If you liked it and want to help support my terrible channel, please go check out some of my other content. I make various amounts of skits, films, and other series. I have a comedic video game review show as well, or you can just always come back and listen to these until I finish the series. Whatever works for you, my dudes. Thanks for listening to my cast member stories, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!